Hey guys, it's a legend. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Real Quarantine Show. You know what? We've got a bit of a bonus for you because not only do we have a brand new episode, we have actually classic episodes. Because before we came to you, we were on another network and we played a bunch of cool shows. Andy, tell the people what you thought of those old shows.
It's all these shows are great. I mean, I always say, what we do is for the love of the business. We've had great episodes. I've been able to talk with some of the guys from Puerto Rico about Puerto Rico memories. We've talked a lot of history. One of my favorites is talking not once but twice with the Tennessee stud, Ron Fuller.
I mean, that's incredible. I would never have thought a year ago, a guy who loves wrestling history, that I would ever have a chance to actually talk and ask questions to the Tennessee stud. That was amazing. Elio, what kind of great memories do you have on this show?
Yeah, there are so many great episodes, and we've had a couple that come to mind. Of course, Continental, the Ron Fuller episodes, both times we had him on, as well as one of my favorites, the Madison Square Garden Glory Days.
Oh, yeah. And we've had some great people. We've had D'Lo Brown, Savio Vega. We've had some really fun guys. We've had some great old veterans. We've had some young up-and-coming stars. And that's what this show is, you're going to see in the future, is going to be all about that. We're going to encapsulate history. We're going to talk about topics of today. We're going to talk about the things that you guys want to talk about. And these little background, these classic episodes of ours, we'll go back, revisit some of the things we've done in the last year. And off and on, we'll be going forward with a whole bunch of new things. So we look forward to seeing you all. Welcome back to the Real Quarantine. Fans, welcome to another edition of WPOV Quarantine. I'm your host, the legend T. James Logan, and with me, a big cast of stars we got this week. We have, of course, our co-hosts, the Lone Wolf Andy Anderson.
Howdy.
And we have the gentleman, Elio Canella.
Good to be here.
And we have semi-regular Chief Attakullakulla.
Thanks for having me back.
And welcoming first time to the show, Bushwhacker Luke, one of the legendary halves of, you knew him as the Bushwhacker, even more as the Kiwi Sheepherders. Luke, welcome to the show.
Whoa, good day, mateys. It's great to be on your show. Let's get the bastard started.
You heard the man.
Yeah, let's get it started, mate. I'm roaring to go to tell you a lot of lies in the business.
All right. Well, you know what? We're here to talk about the territory days. And here's some guys who either know it and loved it or were a part of it. And so let's get started talking about it. First of all, I want to ask Luke. Luke, you were definitely a guy who competed in the territory days.
Boy.
It was obviously quite a bit different than when you went to the WWE and had a whole different kind of system.
Completely different, mate. Completely different. In the territorial days, I was known as a wrestler. When I went to WWE, it changed. I became a celebrity. It was a whole different ballgame. Territory days, people say to you, a lot of the fans would say to you, hey, or not the fans, but the street smart people would say wrestling was bullshit. You know how it was and that? But when I went to WWF, businessmen from all ages would come up and say, thank you. You entertained the whole family, from my kids to my grandparents.
And so looking at that really quickly, what was your preference? What did you enjoy? I mean, obviously the pay was much better, but
my preference, of course, being the bad guy, being a sheep herder. Or before that, when I started, I was Sweet William, a fag, and that was in the early '60s, mate. And I guess a lot of you people weren't born in the early '60s.
Not me.
Anyhow, when I first come out, getting started, my first appearance in North America was in Canada. We were brought to Canada by a well-known tag team, the Vachons, Maurice Vachon and Butcher Vachon, Paul Vachon. You know, Mad Dog Vachon and Butcher Vachon, Paul and Maurice. And at that time, the hottest place in North America for wrestling was Ontario and Quebec. Now, I didn't realize that at the time, but I've heard now through many channels people talk about the business in the 70s, early 70s, Quebec and Ontario, you know, the gardens in Toronto. That was one of the hottest places. And of course, the Quebec territory, there was two promotions. The Rougeaus were running against the Vachon promotion, which was Grand Prix, and it was owned by the Vachons and Edward Carpentier, who became an announcer, a voiceover man for WWF, the French. He used to do the French for WWF. Anyhow, that was our first thing. And of course, when we came in there, the main heel was Killer Kowalski, who I'd met in the 60s in Australia, 65, 66. I'd known him. And of course, Gene Prix, Andre the Giant. He was the main baby face. And Butch and me had wrestled him in New Zealand when he was 350. He was 7'2", big ass throwing only 350 pounds. He hadn't come to North America yet. And Butch and me worked with him for a month in New Zealand every night. So we knew them, and this place, Grand Prix was on fire. It was running 3 towns a night. And, you know, I had a crew of 60 people on the road. Well, that's not counting the locals who lived in some of the towns. You only saw them when you're near their towns or around the area that they lived in. But it was doing sellout business. It was unreal. When Gene Prix, the Andre, came in the start of 72 to it was in February or January 72, and we came in June or July. So he'd been there 6 months before us. And of course, he, you know, as he was the 8th wonder of the world, or whatever they called it, 7th wonder, and that he was selling out all the places. So even the other towns when he wasn't on were selling out too. The territory was hot. They had Billy Two Rivers, Tarzan Tyler, Jules Besson, Billy War Eagle. They had 3 Indians, Billy White Cloud, and of course the main one, Billy Two Rivers. He was the first ever American Indian or North American Indian ever to go over to Europe and England. He was a big name, and there were so many the talents, a lot of guys from the States, and of course Canadians there. It was packed. The Grand Prix was a big office. It had a floor with a ring and with lounge chairs around it, chrome ring posts, and a running track, a spring-loaded running track around the ring. Then at the next floor down, it had a gym below that, weightlifting gym, and the office was on the top floor. It was a big business, a real big business. And then, of course, they're running all over Quebec and Ontario, and of course, some of the top states, the cities in Vermont. We were working 2 or 3 cities in Vermont, you know, which was close to Montreal. Would just drive in there and drive back.
Wow, incredible!
Of course, we came in and Butch was Brute Miller. And it was Sweet William and Brute Miller. Well, we were doing the Beauty and the Beast thing. Okay. We've been doing that for about 6 years.
Were you the Beauty or the Beast, Mike?
He was the Beauty.
I was the Beauty.
He was
I had
Sweet
the
Luke.
long blonde hair and the gown. And I was Sweet William and Brute. And they said, there's been so many Brutes here. Brute Barnard and someone else. There was a Brute there that they changed Butch's name to Paul Vachon looked around in the office there and saw a paperback lying there, and it was Nick Carter. He was Detective Series and a paperback.
Yeah.
And he says, your name is Nick Carter, Crazy Nick Carter. And of course, at the time I was leading around I was leading Butch on a chain. He had a collar around his neck, and I was leading to the ring in the chain. So they called him Crazy Nick Carter. And there you are.
Outstanding.
Now the first, now I'm telling you, that was the positive side. Here's a little negativity. we hadn't been used to doing interviews, and of course, they had TV in Sherbrooke, and they had another TV out of Montreal. We did a lot of two TVs each, not each week, but every 2 weeks. 1 week we'd do Sherbrooke, the next week we'd do Montreal, and we'd do numerous shows. Anyhow, the first time they put a mic in front of us. Now, being the sane one, the Sweet William, I was supposed to do the talking. And they told me what to say. They, you never told you word to word. They just told you where to go. What I mean? Not to help. Where to go.
Maybe sometimes
sound like that.
And they wanted to come up with a final. And I went in front of that mic, and I went to talk, and I went, So we tried 3 times, and it was still, and then Butch started doing the talking. And that was it. He was talking all over the place, and he would go down on his back and kick his legs and get up talking. Oh, Caponte, and they love that bullshit. Anyhow, so when we started, they love that bullshit. So we're on the road, and after a couple of weeks of television in the other towns, we were the main. If we weren't in the main town with Andre and the main crew, and the other towns, we were one of the main events right from the word go. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Back in those days, and there'd be 3 towns, one of the smaller towns or the next town. So that was our start in the business, and we were there for 3 years. And the Hollywood Blondes were there too. Jerry Brown and Dale Roberts. Dale Roberts became one of the Freebirds. Yeah. And Jerry Brown was he was notorious for a lot of things in the States. He put a bomb in Bill Watts's and mailbox, but it was a big clock with a ticking sound, all wrapped up. Bill Watts fired him, and this is just a story. I'm jumping off track here, and I got to put a bit of humor in there. And he put this bloody package in Bill Watts' mailbox, and then parked across the road just down the street. And Bill Watts could see his car there. He stayed there for 2 days, and Bill Watts went to get the mail and heard the tick, and he called the bomb squad.
Outstanding.
He didn't know. Jerry Brown, he played heavy ribs. He was pissed off with Bill Watts. Anyhow, they were the main tag team, and they had Humperdinck. So Oliver Humperdinck as their manager, and he was one of the notorious managers of the early 70s and the 70s. He's from Florida. He's from Minnesota, but he was based in Florida, and he was a manager for many big stars in Florida Championship Wrestling in the 70s and that. And anyhow, they were crazy guys.
Okay.
The Hollywood Blondes were wild.
Well, I just want to ask a quick question, Luke. And this was just curious to me. We had done recently a thing about heat and how certain people would play on certain things to get the fans riled up. When you were playing Sweet Luke, right? Sweet William. You obviously didn't really drive people. Did they really believe that you were a gay character, and that's why they were so enraged?
Well, I was more or less a sissy of the two, and Butch was the bully. When the baby faces come in, I'd be on top, and then they'd get back on top of me, and Butch would have to come in and cut them off again and feed them to me so I could go back on top. So the people would know, I got heat. I was like a Chris Holt, someone like that got heat from the bumps and from backing off and all that sort of shit.
Okay.
You know what I mean? the contrast was I was backing off and begging and then handed me the guy and I'd F around the eyes and get on top and do the sort of a lot of cheating stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then Butch would come in and just be the bully.
Okay. Now you said the Grand Prix promotion at this time was so incredibly big. It sounds very lavish for what we consider a territory. Now I want to throw this question over to Vance Nevada. Vance, I know you've studied lots of territories. Grand Prix, I had never known. What was its comparison to other territories in Canada at the time? Was it that much ahead of people that it was noticeable?
I think it's really, the comment is about the Montreal territory itself. So, Montreal had been running since 1965 under the Rougeaus. And it was actually, sort of this growing contingent of guys that were kind of bitter about Rougeau's success, maybe a little bit of jealousy there. So it started with Yvon Robert, who was snubbed by Rougeau when he started in 65. Yvon Robert was sort of like the heir apparent to the empire when Eddie Quinn died. So Rougeau decides to go ahead and do it, and he actually used Yvon Robert's tapes to get his own TV deal. So Rougeau was running. You had these guys like the Vachons, who were Quebec guys who were never given a main event opportunity under Eddie Quinn. See Johnny Rougeau and his brother making lots of money, and they said, hey, we need to get in there. So, what's really fascinating about, that era of Montreal at that time, and when I look at the records, I just think like I was born way too late, is you had the Rougeaus running a full schedule 7 nights a week, sometimes running 2 towns a night. And you also had Grand Prix running Quebec 2 nights a week, or sort of 2 towns a night, 7 nights a week, both with television, both trying to outdo each other. And so you would see like just this escalation, in the newspaper ads where, they're like making a big deal of 20 wrestlers on this show, 10 matches, and each trying to outdo each other. And it really started with the Rougeaus drawing 22,000 at Jerry Park in Montreal in the summer of 72. That really was the drive for the Vachons to outdo it. The following summer, 73, drawing 29,000 in Jerry Park. Which is like,
I was on that card. I've got to tell you about the match too in a minute. And that even Robert was in the office. When I meant to say there was a blind man who was in the office too, and I can't remember his name. The other gentleman might know in Grand Prix office. Who was the blind man?
I'm not sure the blind guy. Lucien Gregoire, maybe?
Yeah, Lucien Gregoire. He had something to do in the office. He claimed to be blind, but he stood at the back of the arenas and the matches, and he knew what was going on. So, the bullshit about the blind man and that, but even Robert was in the office there too. He was in the office with Carpentier and the Vachons. Yeah, Butcher Vachon came into a lot of money. There's another story. Anyhow, that's where a lot of the money came from.
Okay.
They had a big television truck, their own 18-wheelers. It was a big business. And of course, the Rougeaus had Abdullah. At this time, the Duke had jumped over to Rougeau because the Duke was supposed to be in Jerry Park with Maurice Vachon, with Killer Kowalski, and they had to change that match, and it was Maurice Vachon and Killer Kowalski. They did the same angle that
Whipper Billy Watson.
Yeah, with the ear, and Morris gigged his ear so bad, if you gig your ear, the blood just starts flowing. And of course, when it came to do a big show, you can imagine how Morris just grabbed the blade and went,
gee whiz.
Yeah, but we got 29, just under 29,500 people there. That was, as the other gentleman was saying, that broke records. That was one of the big records in North America at the time. apart from the ballpark. Well, Vince came along and did the boxing and wrestling and did in Shea Stadium, and I think he did 46,000.
Okay.
Right,
Now,
right.
before
But
we move, sorry.
But by comparison, Tom,
Yes.
around that same time, there was like an article in the newspaper. I've got the clipping, and it was talking about Madison Square Garden had its biggest crowd ever, 13,000 people.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And Montreal was regularly outdrawing. Like there was probably like a dozen cards that were in that 17 to 19 to 20,000 range, excluding the Jerry Park shows. So they're just like unbelievable.
The Forum was selling out every time.
Well, it's interesting too. I mean, if we're going to touch on Memphis later, because reading some of the stuff about Memphis, like even then, like what a hotbed it was compared to New York, because it'd say, okay, well, Madison Square Garden, 13,000, 16,000. But I mean, like from what I was reading with the Mid-South Coliseum, they were packing that weekly. And I mean, that's like the totals, I can't remember what year it was, but they were saying like 1 year, it was like over, 100,000, maybe 200,000 people in Memphis in the Mid-South Coliseum for that year, because they were running weekly, to where Madison Square Garden was, running monthly.
Yeah, they were putting 8,000 people in Memphis every Monday night.
There you go. Yeah.
Wow. Every Monday.
I was there for many Monday nights, mate.
Yeah.
That's one thing I said to Jerry Jarrett. I said, we had an angle with the Fabulous Ones that was selling out the whole territory. We had a 4 or 5 months run there with just doing angles all the time. The Fabulous Ones and us. And we laid out a program at Jerry's place and went with it. And we did gimmick matches. We built up, and then we'd have a blow off. Then we'd come up with another small angle, and then come up with another build for another gimmick. And we would go into Memphis. Billy, Jerry wasn't working. He just worked now and again in Memphis. But every time we came into Memphis and we had a really hot angle, and that he would bring in the AWA champion and put hair against belt and all that sort of stuff. And that he would no angle, just the verbal thing. And I was getting paid $500 each time for Memphis when we've been working around the territory every night selling out. They come to Memphis and someone else would go on top. That's the first time I said to Jerry, hey, this is not right. I complained about it. He said, well, Jerry owns a third of Memphis. He owned a third then till he did the gimmick, and where he tried to steal the territory. That's it. I was there when and that was the finish. That was the finish of me in there, because I was a Jarrett man and a Boo Dundee man. Anyhow, we jumped from.
That's okay. We'll get back to it and we'll get across to it. My next thing is I want to kind of laterally move across Canada now over into Western Canada and talk a bit about, of course, we'd have to talk about Stampede Wrestling, which was a very big promotion within Western Canada. Now, Luke, did you compete at all in Stampede Wrestling?
Yeah, but that's after about a year and a half. The office said to us, that we've been winning or getting put over all the time. We're doing angles, and we worked with Kowalski, we worked with the Giant and Capontier every night for a while. We worked with everybody there. The two Indians, the Italians, Gino Brito and Dino Bravo. Dino was only 19 when we first came there, and so we worked with a lot of the guys there. And then they said, if you stay on, we'd have to start usually putting people over, but we'd like you to come back. We've talked to this other promoter at Stampede, and he wants you to come in there. Now, we never knew who Stu Hart was, or we never knew Stampede, how notorious it was. It was the dungeon. Anyhow.
Did you make it to the dungeon? Did you get did you get stretched?
I'm just going to start on this. So we go over there on a Thursday night. Friday night is the pavilion. That's where that holds about 3,000 to 4,000. Any of you has been in the pavilion?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. What do you say? 3,000?
About 3,000. Yeah.
3,000, right? And now at that time, there was in the park. This was the Stampede Fairgrounds. You know the fairgrounds. They had the corral there.
Yep.
Now the corral's a saddle dome now, but the corral was only 8,000 or 12,000 people. I'm not sure, mate. What was it?
Vance, do you know?
Yeah, to be around the 8,000. Yeah.
8 to 10. Anyhow, now the first night we were there, we're working against the champs, and we're getting discovered, DQ'd. And then we're working with them. I think we had the flagpole, New Zealand flagpole. It was a tubular, wasn't light. It was steam pipe with the flag, and it was screwed together. You know what steam pipe is? It's a heavy. But we used to know how to hit with it without hurting people. Anyhow, and we had a thing in the middle where you screwed it so we could carry it in a bag, so it would go in half, right? So we had it in the corner, I think, grabbed it and knocked them both down and bloodied them up. Next minute, this guy comes out and starts throwing these kids in the ring. Now, the kids are from 10 or 11 to 13 or 14. And there's 4 of them. 2 of them have been gigged. 2 of them are bleeding.
Jeez.
And the guy at the outside is throwing them in. You can guess who's throwing them in. I won't say it yet. And he yells out, "Champ!" Well, Andy will know straight away. "Champ! Beat him up, champs! Beat him up!" So we put the boots of these fucking kids. And then we leave when they're all laying downstairs. We leave the ring and head back to the dressing room. Now, before we went out, Stu Hart wasn't there. Archie Goldie was the booker at the time, the Mongolian Stomper. Yeah. When we went back to walk through the dressing room, right on the entrance, when you go in, and there's rooms on the left, rooms on the right, there's a hallway, there's fucking Stu standing there. And we didn't know it was Stu, but by the time we got there, Stu was wider than the hips, about 5'10", but thick, very thick, 270, 275. He says, "What the fuck are you doing? They're my kids." and I says, the guy told us it was Abdullah who was throwing them in the ring. Abdullah, of course it was. Yeah. Of course it was. And of course, Abdullah, he was in the territory, and he knew he needed help to keep the cards up high, and that was our first night. Now the televisions played at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, right? So the people have seen us. The kids are well known. Yep. They're well known on TV there, and the fans see it. Now, we didn't know, but this weekend, it was a double shot. 3 times a year, they do the pavilion on a Friday and do the corral on a Sunday afternoon. If any of you has been there at that period of time, you would have known that.
So were they doing this Saturday? Were they doing the Edmonton Saturday night then? Is that like? Yeah,
Saturday night. But Edmonton was bicycled. They never saw that. They never saw us for the following week. Yeah, right. That's right. So when I went out in Edmonton, and that we didn't get any heat till we worked in the match. We had to dig and get our own heat there, just like we did when we first came into Calgary that night. Anyhow, when Sunday when we went out, people were throwing stuff at us. We had heat, but we didn't have drawing heat. You know what I mean? We just had heat, what you call it, not artificial heat. People were pissed off at us and were throwing us because we beat up the kids. Right. And of course, we won the belts that night. It was return match and we won the belts. But that was our first weekend working for Stu. Anyhow, getting to the dungeon, Archie left, and then we were called up every Sunday. Stu would get us to come up to his home and had to eat. You know about the cats and the shit. Anyhow, and he would go down the dungeon, and some of the boys would come in the afternoon just to be in the dungeon because we'd have a close shot Sunday night, and Stu would get them to go on their hands and knees. He would never get them to fight for. He would never fight for the hold. He would get them to go on their hands and knees. He would put the hold on and then tell them to fight out of it. But they could never. He was so thick in the hips and thick legs that he'd hold that hold on them and put the pressure on. Put the pressure on so much that their eyes would fucking pop. The veins would pop in their eyes, or they couldn't even talk sometimes. Shoo, shoo, and they'd shit their pants or piss themselves.
Oh,
this is true. This is true. Because Brett in the 80s when I was in WWF, he had tapes that he taped, not video, audio tapes of guys screaming while Dad put a sugar hold on them.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that was Stu in the dungeon. Anyhow, we ended up helping with doing the sort of booking for the territory after Archie went. We were there for another year, and we were called more or less calling the shots. We were every night. We were the last match, unless we had bought some Abdullah in for the weekend, and Abdullah, we got someone else to come in to work against Abdullah.
Right.
Now, the question I have is, now that you're at this part at Stampede, are you still wrestling as Sweet William, or have you guys become the sheep herders yet?
No,
or is that later on?
Sweet William and Nick Carter.
Okay, perfect.
And I was still known. My name was Ted Williams when I come over, but they couldn't tell. No one could call me Ted Williams because he was a big star in baseball.
That's right. Yeah.
And so it wasn't until I went into the States full time that they said, the sheep herders, the name that we got the sheep herder name and that, and they said Luke's a real farmhand. Luke is a farmhand name, because sheep chasing, herding sheep and all that. So yeah. Luke, I got the name Luke Williams, and then Butch went back to Butch Miller. He went from Brute to Butch Miller.
Okay. Now, here's an interesting question I have, because geographically, I don't know Quebec enough. And I know you guys are wrestling constantly all around Quebec. Then I do know about being out here in Alberta and I know that during the territories at this time, you really had a lot of car driving to do between shows. Was it as crazy in Quebec as that? Or was it worse in Western?
Mate, in Quebec, we stayed in little hotels. We'd go on the road, and they had good deals and little hotels everywhere. There was only one place we stayed in, and that was a Wednesday night. We would, Monday, was it Monday, Red Deer, or Lethbridge Monday, Red Deer Tuesday, and then Saskatoon Wednesday. We would stay over in Saskatoon and then get a late checkout, drive to Regina.
Yeah, wow.
And drive to, which is only an hour and a half away, do that show, and that was an hour difference from Calgary, and then we'd say it would be 10 o'clock, and then we'd leave that 550-mile run from Regina to Calgary. Now, in the winter, that was a bitch. Sometimes the roads were closed, kidding. And that we were told all the roads were closed, but we would have to get through because, Friday, we had to get some sleep, and then we had to do TV Friday night.
Right.
So that Regina was always sold out on a Thursday night.
Okay.
That was always sold out. The fucking Saskatoon would be, that arena would be about half full, but it was a big arena of Saskatoon. I don't know what it held, but it was about half. The worst town in the territory, Red Deer was a small town, but it always sold out. But the Monday night in Lethbridge, even with the Giant, even with big names, you know what I mean? Harley Race, a big house there would be 500 or 600.
Wow.
Could never
But-
get that. Could never get that, and I didn't understand why we kept running there. But I found out later that Stu got it for next to nothing. The arena, and
Right.
and we did that. And it's a sad story there because that's where the Japanese butcher me got these two Japanese guys who were in Montreal, and they were going back to Japan. And we said, "Could you stay over? Stu will fly you into Calgary and stay over here for a month." And so it was a tag team for us to work with. It was a tag team that Stu brought in to get rid of us. He was trying to get rid of us out of the territory as the program went. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he brought those two in, and that's when Tokyo Joe and Lethbridge, when his car went off the road, and he was at the back of the car getting a bag out of the trunk, where a car braked behind him and slid right off, and he was in between when he got jammed in between two cars and got his leg smashed and had to have his leg amputated.
Oh.
And then on, he lived in Calgary. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He didn't go. He was so embarrassed to go home to Japan that's where he made his home, Calgary.
Wow, that is a tragic tale indeed. Now, Vance, I know you studied a lot into Stampede Wrestling and stuff, and can you give people a rough idea of how big that territory was if you had to drive around it? Is that a crazy question to ask? I don't know.
No, it was a lot of miles in those days. We did a lot of miles. Quebec, we did miles, and we did it in loops. We had loops there.
Yeah.
You understand, where you stay over.
Yeah.
Well, we had one loop, and that was from Calgary to Saskatoon, and that Saskatoon to Regina back home. Now that loop, that was about a 5 hours drive to Saskatoon, maybe 6 to Saskatoon, and then an hour and a half from Saskatoon, or 2 hours from Saskatoon to Regina, and then that 10-hour run from Regina to Calgary.
Okay.
That was a 10-hour run. The weather, I'm talking about weather and all that.
Yeah.
That was a miserable run, mate.
And back then, it's like kind of doing like the Calgary, Regina thing. Was it mostly 2-lane highway back then? I'm trying to think of when the Trans Canada came around. So I don't know if that would have been 4-lane or 2-lane.
It's probably 2-lane mostly. A lot of the Trans Canada still
yeah.
is actually.
Yeah, well, especially through Saskatchewan. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was 4 lanes in places, but a lot of 2 lanes.
Okay.
I remember traveling with Harley Race one weekend. He came in for the World Championship, and Butcher me travel with him. Harley had his beer after we left Regina or going there. He had his dozen beer in the car, cold, and that. He had, of course, and he had his gun, and he brought his car up. I think it was a Grand Am, and that. All I can remember traveling at 100, 110 miles an hour, Harley, a beer in one hand on the steering wheel and a gun in the other hand, firing out the window at 110 miles an hour, 120 miles an hour.
Oh, the good old days.
That was Harley. Go back in time. That's the 72. That's 73. 73, 47 years ago.
Wow. That's almost as old as me.
He was younger. He was in the 30s then, wild. 30.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, okay, I got an interesting question here. I'm going to throw this one out to Vance. And Vance, this one I want to ask is, we've talked about Grand Prix financially, and you realized how you've recorded how much action and stuff was going on. And how comparable was it to the heyday of, say, Stampede Wrestling? Were they equitable? What was that like?
There was bigger crowds. Quebec, Montreal promotion, bigger crowds. Much bigger crowds, mate. Bigger arenas, a lot of coliseums.
All right. Financially, though, Vance, what would you think? What was really going on there financially?
I think, you had Toronto and Montreal, those two territories both drawing big. And both of those were like 2 towns a night territories. So you had Toronto and Montreal both being the big shows. And then you would have crews running 2 different towns. So when you looked at those cards, you would think financially, like, how were they able to finance 10 matches a night? But you'd have 2 loops going at the same time. So you'd have 2 5-match cards happening, and then you would meet back in the center. And it was the same with Toronto. Out in the West, it was really 1 loop, 1 town a night. And so, as much pride as we take in Western Canada for Stampede Wrestling or Vancouver All-Star Wrestling, Toronto and Montreal, eclipsed us tremendously. And even in the Maritimes, where you had the Cormiers running one circuit and Emile Dupree running another, they were both running concurrently. And there was no war over the territory. The Cormiers had their towns, and an understanding with Dupree that you just don't run, within this distance of these towns. And both were making money.
I actually went up to there. That was a spin-off. That was the Maritimes was a spin-off of Grand Prix. They got our tapes, plus they had their own television up there. And I went up and worked for the not the Communists, the
Dupree.
I worked against John. Worked at one week. I worked against Mad Dog and Dupree, Emil, and then another week I worked against Don Leo Jonathan. Now he had 10%, I think, of that territory.
Yes.
With that, and boy, they both sold out. The weeks sold out because Jonathan was a big name up there. And of course, I was on the big match in the Montreal Forum with the Giant and Jonathan, Don Leo Jonathan. That was a match of the century. The one they had in the Forum and went to midnight. And of course, the match was stopped because of the curfew thing. And they had it back again. But here was 2 guys. One was drop kicking, and the other one could do kip ups. Don Leo could do kip ups. Andre could do drop kicks. How's that? And both men were monsters.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible.
Unreal.
Now, we should probably, before we go into some of the bigger territories down in the States, we should take a look at All-Star Wrestling out of the Vancouver area, which also had a television show and its own weekly shows. Luke, did you ever get a chance to go over to All-Star over in Vancouver?
Yes. I worked for Don Owens in '79. I was working for Don Owens, and of course he had part of that territory.
Okay.
Well, Gene Kaninsky was there still, and that other guy who was running who's the other guy?
Al Tomko.
Al Tomko, yeah. Al Tomko. I'm laughing about him and that because we did an angle with him on the television, and it was whacked with a flag. We whacked him with a flagpole or a bit of timber, and that instead of spinning around and going down with his back to the camera, he still stood there and gigged right in front of the camera. Here's the promoter, and we went like this. You know what I mean? That was. But we were coming up there, and this is a funny thing too. Gene Kaninsky, his wife had left him, or she died, and that. I think she in the garage. She put she did the exhaust strip with pipes, and then put the tube into the car and suffocated. Anyhow, he was going a bit insane, and he dropped down in weight. And whoever we had hot down in out of Portland Wrestling, Northwest Championship Wrestling, like we had Buddy Rose was hot as a heel, or we had a babyface hot, they would come up there, and Gene one week would be going against as a babyface against Playboy Buddy Rose, and then the following week he'd be going against Jesse Ventura. He'd be a heel one week, and he'd do the same interview, and be a babyface the next week.
That's an interesting.
We used to come up there, and we were, of course, when we were in Northwest Wrestling, the whole time we were there, apart from the first 2 months getting over, we worked with Piper and Rick Martel. We worked with them 14 months straight. Rick, Ronnie told me, and we had one time we had 22 consecutive sellouts in Don Owens' building. Don Owens bought an old supermarket. I think it was an old supermarket or skating place, and he changed it into an arena, and built bleachers on wheels. And he would sell photos, on the phone ahead of time. The internet wasn't alive then. They'd do pre-selling, and he would put all the seats, all the pre-sold seats, they would be seating on the floor around, and he'd move the bleachers in. And if he sold more pre-solds, well, the bleachers would be back further. So it always looked like it was full.
Always full. Yeah, that's brilliant. But he did great business. 2,500 every week. You know what I mean? And he would do a Monday 3 or 4 times a year. He would do a Saturday night and a Tuesday night. Because I lost my hair to Roddy on a Saturday night, and Butch came in and challenged him, and he lost his hair on a Tuesday. Both sellouts. You know what I mean? I lost my hair to him twice. No, man.
We worked with Rick Martel. Well, they were such good workers, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that was a well-known territory, Northwest Championship Wrestling, because it was short trips except for one long trip, to down to Medford. And that was the longest trip.
Okay.
And Vancouver, we used to stay over. We'd drive up to Vancouver, stay over, and then do Seattle on the way home. Vancouver used to be a Monday night.
Okay. All right.
In the fairgrounds.
All right. So just so I get a very clear understanding, Vance, if you could tell us, what was the big state at this time of All-Star Wrestling? What was its territory exactly? What am I thinking of in my head here
Vancouver would do Monday night in Vancouver. Mm-hmm. Tuesday would be over on the island in Victoria. Mm-hmm. Wednesday night was television, which they taped out of BC TV Studios, which is now Global in Burnaby. Mm-hmm. And then Thursday would be Chilliwack. And then they would have loops. So you'd have like an Okanagan loop. So they might do Kamloops, Kelowna, Osoyoos, or Vernon, or they do like a Northern Interior loop where they hit like 100 Mile House, Prince George, and do that loop. And then there was a period of time when they had a double crew as well. So you'd have, you get together for Monday, Vancouver, Tuesday, Victoria, Wednesday, TV. And then you've got a crew that's going down into the States. You'd have Spokane, Tacoma, some of the border towns, Bellingham, and you got the other crew running the other direction. So you had some guys, maybe that, came into the territory, didn't have their work papers to work across the border. Mm-hmm. They were working the Canadian circuit, or maybe they were local guys that were part-timers. They were doing the Canadian towns, and then you had some of the American guys doing the American towns.
Kaninsky lived on the American side, didn't he?
He did. He lived in Blaine, Washington, just across the line. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And when did the glory days, would you say, because these are obviously, these territories, some of them still exist in some form, but when would the glory days say of All-Star, kind of, because, they're running 2 crews that got television. Was it the loss of television? What was it that kind of burst that bubble for a while?
It was Al Tomko that killed Vancouver. In Vancouver, they got television first in 1961. And it was actually a guy who was originally from Edmonton. His name was Rod Fenton, and he wrestled in the 30s and 40s. Had started promoting in Arizona, and my understanding is that he also liked to bet on the horses. And he got in a little trouble in Arizona, owed some guys some money, so he came back north to Canada to get away from them and partnered with the promoter here. But he was fantastic for business because he had been in the southern states. He was actually, Rod Fenton was the guy that started Kiniski right out of college football in Arizona. So, you know, he was the guy that brought Kiniski back home to Canada originally. But in the 60s, you had, you know, a stronger relationship with the Portland territory. So you could trade talent back and forth. And it's only about 5 hours from Vancouver to Portland. But then you had like this tremendous talent coming in, like Don Leo Jonathan came in '64. And then you had Kiniski win the world title as the homegrown guy in '66. So tremendous opportunity for Vancouver. So I would say like, you know, 65 to 75 was kind of like the hot time for Vancouver.
There was another promoter too in the 70s when I went over there the first time. The other promoter there in Vancouver before Tonko.
Vander Kovacs.
Nice gentleman. He was a nice gentleman to me, anyhow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know
before
what?
we move on to the we move on to the American territories,
Yeah.
Tom, I got to tell you because I've been digging it up. Did you know that of all the tag teams in the history of Canadian wrestling,
Okay.
the Sheepherders wrestled more matches than anyone in Canada except 2 teams?
Oh, are you going to ask who those 2 teams are?
No one will get it because the number 1 team, they had 441 matches together as a team in Canada, was Ivan and Carol Kalmakoff out of the States. The Kalmakoffs from the 50s and 60s.
Hey, too far for me.
Team number 2 was the Christies, Jerry and Bobby Christie from California, who were like mainstays for Stu Hart, big baby faces for him in the 60s into 1970. And the number 3 team, they wrestled more than 300 matches together as a team in Canada, was the Sheepherders.
Wow.
Incredible.
Good. That's
now, you know, before I came in to Northwest Championship Wrestling for Don Owens, I was working in Hawaii and that for the Ed Francis had left and the New Zealand promoter had bought it. But we were living the life there, flying every day, flying over Diamond Head every night and watching them making Hawaii 5-0, and leaving the beach at 5 o'clock, getting into the town at 7 in another island, and then getting back at 9:30, 10, be back home in Waikiki at 10 o'clock at night. That was an easy territory. We just kept our head above water. Anyhow, after we got out of that, and we went to Roddy Piper come for a show over there, and he said we're short of a tag team in Northwest, and he rang up Don Owens. Hence we got into Don Owens' territory, but we had a Japan tour and we had to fill in time, and that. So I called Stu Hart up. I said I got 6 weeks off. Hence he brought us in, and when I left Stu Hart in 85. The end of 1975, you know, there was still big guys there still. Abdullah, John, I forget, he was 325, forget his name, another big guy, and there was a lot of big guys. So when I came back in 79, I'm in the dressing room, and Butcher and me are the biggest guys in the dressing room. And that, and then I go out to look in the arena, and it's the first match. The fucking arena sold out.
Oh,
the arena sold out. Now Tommy Billington had been there he'd been there. His partner hadn't come to Canada yet. You know, Davey Boy. Tommy was there selling out. It was another British guy. I forget his name. I know him well because he was only 100. Tommy was 175 wet, muscular, but not leany muscular, 175, and the other guy was around about 180.
Bernie Wright.
No.
Marty Jones.
Oh.
Marty Jones. And they were in a cage match this night, and this is the first time I seen there's this fucking Dynamite kid coming, pushing, slamming the guy on the other side of the ring and coming off the corner and splashing him on top of the cage. You know, the same thing that Snooker was doing, you know, when I was in the 70s, late 70s, or, you know, and he was doing that too in the mid to late 70s in Oregon, off the corner and the big splash. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, Tommy Billington, we teamed up then, and we worked mainly with the Hart family 6-mans, and Brett had only started 6 months a year before. So we weren't just working with Dean and his other brother, the fireman, I forget his name.
Keith.
No, Keith.
Keith Hart.
Keith, and that, because, you know, the other one has died of cancer. He was too crazy. Smith. Smith was doing, his main life was doing ribs. He'd come on the road and just plan ribs. Anyhow, gets to the story. In the 6-man we were the British connection, and that we were in Edmonton and Calgary. We worked with Brett, Keith, and Stu. Wow. How about that?
That's
I can
pretty
say
cool.
we worked with Stu Hart.
That's pretty
we
cool.
Worked both, and we got the sliders. How we used to go down on the knee with that punch and slide, and they used to clip you. You go right past your ear, and the elbow used to clip you on the chin. the sliders. They were notorious. We're notorious for the sliders. Yep. We worked with Stu.
Okay.
That was something I'll always remember. Those 2 matches.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now, Chief, I knew I didn't ask you too much about Canada because I didn't think it would be fair, because I knew you grew up watching a ton of American stuff. Did you have anything that you watched in Canada at all from territory stuff that you wanted to quickly mention about before we moved into America? I just didn't want to skip you over totally.
Yeah, really. Back then,
just to say that
magazines.
Oh,
you know.
Yeah, the history books.
Yep. The history books, the after books, All right. Let's take a quick down now look, and we've mentioned Memphis many times, so it's definitely one of the territories that was one of the hottest territories in history of wrestling in North America. Let's talk a bit about Memphis, and let's see. We'll start off first of all, Luke. We're going to ask you, you first going into Memphis, and your thoughts about that.
Well, it was 81 or 82, and a mate of mine was the booker, Bill Dundee, who I met in New Zealand in the mid '60s. You know, Australian wrestlers used to come over to New Zealand, and then we were getting a lot of WCW wrestlers. You know, Jim Barnett owned WCW, and that was in Australia from 65 to 73, WC World Championship Wrestling in Australia. So we get Americans there. And of course, Bill Dundee came over and worked in New Zealand. And then, of course, when I came in there, he was the booker there. And they gave us a couple of guys to get over with, teams to beat up. And then we did an angle. With Jerry Jarrett's father-in-law, who was a big name wrestler in the 60s and early 70s there. His father-in-law. He died 2 years ago.
Eddie Marlin.
Eddie Marlin, mate, you've got an encyclopedia, mate.
This guy is an encyclopedia. That's why he's on
a walking wrestling encyclopedia. Yes.
Yeah. Anyhow, Eddie Marlin, and you know, we did a match where he came in the ring and says we weren't letting our opposition get in the ring. The heels would be out first, and as our opposition would come to the ring, we would jump out and beat them up and get DQ'd or just stopped. And this night, this is about the 4th weekend we were doing it, and Eddie Martin was the commissioner, and of course, being a big star in that area for so many years, and that everybody knew him. So he come in and says, you know, blah, blah, on the apron, and then it says, we've had so much shit from you, and that you're fired, blah, blah. We dragged him in the ring and hit him over the head with a flagpole, and he got heavy juice. The ambulance, this is a TV station in Memphis, which is well known. It's on the main street. The ambulance come, took him out and took him to hospital. That was all on television, and we were fired, and that. Then Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee got up in the mic and says, he said to something they did in hospital. They said, Eddie Marlin, that's the easier way out for them. Let them stay, and we'll give them a good ass kicking and get rid of them. You know what I mean? So we started with Bill Dundee and Jerry Lawler, and they're the two guys that help us to get over. We'd been beating up people, we had heat, but now we were the main two players in the territory. And that's how we went from them to the Fabulous Ones, because they've been building the Fabulous Ones for 6 months with Jackie Fargo as their manager. Yeah, and they both did the walk and all that sort of stuff. They've been Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler had been building them. Hence, we started with them, and that was the start of one hell of a run.
That's pretty cool. Okay. Let's move over to Chief Attakullakulla. Now, I know that you had been watching a lot of Memphis wrestling growing up. What things stuck in your mind right away about Memphis? Like, what made it so different or special or stand out?
It was a very gimmicky territory. A lot of gimmick matches. They did things that other places weren't doing. And
you're bloody right there, mate.
Yeah, right. It was different than any other territory in the United States, that's for sure, because they came up with, they had the dress matches, the dog food matches. You can name it. They came up with.
I was just going to mention the dog food match. I couldn't believe the dog food at the side of the ring, and they had to eat it.
Yeah, it was well, a lot of the territories were more violent back then, a little more bloody, but yeah, Memphis was definitely utilized juice a lot. And of course, another territory I want to talk about with Luke was Southwest Championship Wrestling.
Yeah, we'll get there next.
That was hardcore before anyone else was hardcore, for sure.
Okay.
Would you say, Chief? Would you say that Memphis was kind of ahead of its time, though, as far as the use of gimmicks, kind of like in that regard,
or even stories, because they also had a lot of crazy stories.
Yeah.
And they were ahead of. Sorry about cutting in, but they were the first ones to do videos. Jerry Lawler and Jerry Jarrett, I hear, were doing videos from 1980. Behind music videos with wrestlers.
The promo videos.
Before they bring somebody new into the territory, like the Fabulous Ones, they had these great video packages for 2 months before they bring somebody in. By the time you got to the territory, you're already over.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that is, it's hard to talk about this, but this is the stuff that, or not hard to talk about, but it's very fascinating to talk about this because you see the big things that happen in today's big territories, and these things, some of these people, these small areas don't get the credit for being the genesis of a lot of these things, because it would be hard not to say that some of the bigger companies stole these ideas and incorporated it and tried to make it seem like they were the first to do these things.
Well, and it's real quick, because I just want to touch on it because as far as Memphis goes, but I love talking about this angle because I've talked about it on a lot of our shows, but the Andy Kaufman, Jerry Lawler thing, it sounded like I think it was Vince Sr. that turned it down and Memphis picked it up. And that was like 1982, I believe.
81.
I was there.
That was the first really national wrestling angle. Probably.
Yeah. And for Lawler to jump on that and take advantage of that, like you said, like the national exposure for that was just unreal. I think that really helped Memphis. I touched on earlier about the overall drawing power of Memphis compared to New York, but I think for that year, like 1981, like 81, 82, I think that just blew them out of the water.
Mm-hmm. Back then, they were basically booking everything out of Hendersonville, a suburb of Nashville, out of Jerry Jarrett's house.
Okay, Luke, go ahead. You were going to say?
I was there for that angle, mate. I was in the territory there too. Andy Kaufman was a very laid back, quiet guy. Would sit in the dressing room as quiet as anything, not say a word. But I was there when they did the thing with the fire with Jimmy Hart, and that they had Andy Kaufman was supposed to be he got burnt, and the other way around and they switched the masks and he jumped Jerry Lawler from behind and then got the second run out of it too. They were thinking, hey, their angles were ahead at the time, mate. They created.
Absolutely.
They created Kamala. They created the Blues Brothers. They had the Blues Brothers, two black guys. They created a lot of teams that had music with them and were great attractions, not only in Memphis but in the Mid-South area. Bill Watts, UWF. They would go switch town, and that was one of the biggest territories in the South.
Yeah.
Okay.
For those, and because he's one of our favorite people, and we talk about Jerry Jarrett, we talk about Jerry Lawler, Eddie Marlin. When you talk about Kamala, you talk about the Blues Brothers, some of those guys. I think we would be remiss to at least not acknowledge the contribution of our friend El Sucio, Mr. Dirty Dutch Mantel, for his contributions to Memphis and wrestling in general.
Very much.
That was a big.
Okay. So so Andy, we know he's always been about the Jerry Lawler, Andy Kaufman thing. When it comes to big angles out of Memphis, Vance Nevada, what was the one angle for you that caught your imagination the most?
You know what? I really didn't get tuned into Memphis probably until I was, in the wrestling business.
Okay.
And then, by that time, like we're, early 90s, Memphis wasn't really my territory. I mean, I grew up in Manitoba, right? So AWA was
your territory.
Yeah.
But you were still a collector. You were still a collector of the history books.
Yeah.
So surely you had to have something out of all the magazines from Memphis that hooked you.
You know what? I think my favorite angle, and I was just actually ribbing gorgeous Michelle Starr about this the other day, was Eddie Gilbert, Jerry Lawler, where Eddie Gilbert ran over Jerry Lawler with his car in a parking lot of the WMC TV studio.
Okay. All right. How about you, Chief? What was your favorite, hands down, thing out of Memphis that came? What was your big storyline that got you?
I actually like the one. I like the storyline too, where Eddie Gilbert ran down Jerry Lawler, and then of course the decades long feud that he had with Bill Dundee too. They had they had no ropes matches, and they did everything under the sun.
All right.
And wasn't it Memphis with Lawler and Terry Funk? Weren't they one of the first ones to do the empty arena match? Yeah.
Yeah. And I also
you've probably seen the famous promo that Terry Funk did where he dumped the quart of oil. He shot in the locker room in the shower and he dumped the quart of motor oil over his head. Have you seen that?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, I can say it's out there on YouTube if you haven't seen it. But they did a lot of crazy things down there.
Yeah, here's another big star there too. Austin Idol had a hell of a run.
Yes,
Austin Idol had a big run too with Lawler. But
they were. They feuded. They were tag team partners. They feuded again. It went on forever.
They switched back and forth. But my biggest thing there was, I can't remember what we did. We did a lot of shit there, every week. But the biggest thing that I saw was the Andy Kaufman thing, because that went nationwide. And of course, that the other talk show host came down there. He's retired now. He used to wear glasses.
Yeah, David Letterman.
David Letterman, and he was there, and of course they were trying to say the blood was fake. He actually scraped some blood off the mat and had it tested. You know that?
Yeah. Wow.
It was on his television. It was on his show.
Yeah.
On his show that he scraped some blood off the mat.
Now, okay, before we go any further, I have to give you guys all a moment of lunacy here. Because I just got texted while we're doing this live from Rick Serrano III. And Luke, you do not have to answer this. And please don't answer this. But he just sent me a text saying, please ask Luke about the natural disasters. So the answer is, it's an ongoing joke that this guy loves the natural disasters. He wants to know anything about.
Who was that again?
the host of WPOV Wrestling, who sometimes joins us, of our sister show.
Rick
Serrano
the third.
Exactly.
The third. Rick Serrano the third.
Oh, three of them to forget. No, he actually listed the natural disasters as the number one tag team. We did the things. Sorry, I just had to throw it. Nobody has to talk about the natural disasters.
No, that was the Madison Square Garden with Andre the Giant in that corner. That was the last time that Andre worked for WWF. You know, in I think it was '93 against the National Guarders in Madison Square Garden.
Against the natural disasters.
Jeez.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was a natural disaster for the Bushwhackers.
All right. Chief, you brought up a territory. Tell us the territory again and why it's important to you.
Joe Blanchard's Southwest Championship Wrestling out of San Antonio, which gets overlooked a lot, I think, in wrestling history. But for years, that a huge run. They were originally the ones on the USA Network on Sunday mornings before WWF took the time slot. But I know Luke had Butch and Luke had the Sheepers were a very violent team, were a prominent team down in that area. Bruiser Brody, Joe LeDuc was down there. Abdullah was in and out. Killer Brooks. Of course, Tully Blanchard, Gino Hernandez, and Bruiser Bob Sweetan, Bobby Jaggers. It was a great territory. And, of course, probably the forgotten member of their team was Warlord Jonathan Boyd, who actually got killed in a car accident, I think, when he was in that territory. But he was a very prominent person down in Southwest Championship Wrestling at one point. And Luke probably has some good memories from the Hemisphere Arena in San Antonio, I'm guessing.
The Hemisphere Arena in San Antonio. A lot of stories. That was, I a lot of stories there, mate. My initiation to the territory. I was driving over the city, coming into San Antonio. There's flyovers, one here, one above it, they're stacked about 4 high. And I don't know where I was about the third one up, and I was coming home from a town, and I had a Lincoln Continental. You know the monogram on the hood at the front, like an H, the monogram. Next minute I hear a bang, and the monogram on the car goes like that. I nearly went over to the fucking wall, hit the wall, and that fucking one of the guys now in the territory had a laser light on his gun, and it got my thing, shot at my Lincoln thing, just as a joke. And Bob Sweetan.
I was going to say, it sounds like a Bob Sweetan story.
Yeah, and that was that. Anyhow, after about 6 weeks there, they gave me the book, as the booker there. So that was the first time I ever had the book in the territory. I've been in territories and I've been suggesting finishes a lot, when I was in Stu's territory in the 70s, and when I was back in New Zealand, we always put the finishes together, in the matches and that, did our own finishes and that. But here I am now doing the television and booking talents. And of course, Bruiser Brody lived about 30 miles out. And of course, his wife's a Kiwi from the same country as me, New Zealand. And so I got to know Bruiser very well, And Abdullah, I'd known since, Calgary, before Calgary. He was in New Zealand too, in the late 60s. So I'd known Abdullah and that. So my main two guys bringing in to shoot angles, I bring Abdullah in to get him hot. Brody was already over in the territory, but I used to bring Abdullah in from Atlanta for the TV on a Monday night, get it hot, and then bring him back for the Hemisphere the weekend. We'd do Saturday we would do Austin, Saturday night. Sunday afternoon we'd do down the valley on the border. There's quite a few towns on the border there, mate, isn't there?
Yep.
The Mexican border. West Laco, McMullen, or something or other where Tito Santana's from. And all along there, we'd do that in the afternoon. And then be in San Antonio, small plane, and we'd be back in San Antonio hemisphere for Sunday night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then they did some big shows a few times a year in the Houston Summit too, I know.
Yes, in the Houston Summit. Well, that was Paul Bosch, but he was bringing the San Antonio guys to do the. I wasn't there then. That's when Tully was sort of the book and that, I think, and he had his partner who's dead. You know
Gino Hernandez.
Yeah, what a worker he was, mate. Yeah. Incredible worker. That was an incredible team.
Now, this territory, of course, was marked with super violent matches. Why did that work more so there than other places around, say, in the U.S.? Do you guys think? I would very fit for there.
Yeah, Texas and Arizona. I broke in early in Arizona, and they still the remnants of that. The whole Southwest area was kind of they liked violent, bloody matches just in that region of the United States.
Okay.
It was ECW before ECW, Southwest Championship Wrestling. That was.
Yeah, that's a fair thing to say.
Hey, mate, the Latins love blood and guts. I worked in South America a lot. Yeah, I worked in Central America and I worked in South America, and I worked in San Antonio, and Florida was blood and guts too, because they had a lot of Latins there because coming up from Puerto Rico, and of course I booked in Puerto Rico. We can get to that later, but the blood and guts, it was blood and guts, really blood and guts. I did a lot of different matches there, barbed wire matches, glove on the pole matches, all kinds of matches. I can't think of the names now, but we invented matches. When we were doing blow-offs, we'd invent matches, then we'd invent another match to go on top again, and they're all bloody.
Okay.
Luke, you were in San Antonio, weren't you, when they brought a very young Chicky Star in?
I brought Chicky Star over there because I'd been in Puerto Rico earlier. I'd been in Puerto Rico in 1980, and I brought Chicky and I brought Carlos in too to work with Abdullah sometimes in the shows. I ran footage from Puerto Rico with Carlos there. And plus, we did the biggest angle for Puerto Rico when Carlos got his neck broken by Hanson and Brody. We set that whole angle up in Texas, in San Antonio.
Wow.
Okay. Well, you know what? The guys, you know what? You guys bring up Chicky Star, and I know we're doing a Puerto Rico episode in a couple of weeks. I say we got to get Chicky Star on there now. We got to get that guy. Like, I've always wanted to hear from Chicky Star, so that's something we'll go. But okay, let's move on.
He was a green mate. He was a green little boy that didn't say boo when I had him in fucking Texas.
Yeah, they teamed him up with Bruiser Bob Sweetan.
Yeah, I had him. I had the whole Latin connection there for a while for shows. I had Carlos, Al Perez, Manny Fernandez, and Chicky Star. There's a whole carload of Latins.
Yeah, you know what? An angle that I really remember standing out from down there. Some people might remember Hangman Bobby Jaggers.
Yes.
He was always a heel everywhere. He was up in Central States, up here in my area, and then of course he was down in Texas. You'd never think this guy could become a baby face, but the sheep herders turned him baby face in San Antonio.
Now, I can tell you the angle when we still had USA Network. The angle with the horse with Scott Casey and the bucket full of piss and shit.
Yeah, I remember that. Scott Casey was another great worker that's kind of forgotten now or very overlooked.
Scott Casey. What a good baby face he was. And he had horses too. Cowboy Scott Casey. And of course, Bobby was very loose with the truth. He was a Kansas cowboy, and he could talk on that fucking mic as a heel. He was like a Dusty Rose. He didn't have that twang like the South like Dusty had, but Bobby could talk, and we did this angle that for a horse. Whoever won the match got a horse from the other guy. Now we did this where we shot the television was a junction, and we had a bucket. Now behind this ankle was Terry Funk. This bucket had horse shit in it, but they got horse shit, but all the boys in the back had pissed in it, and a couple of boys had shit in it.
Jeez.
And they mixed it all up.
Oh.
Now, the
The
bucket sat on the stage, and now Terry's on the phone telling Bobby, when the angle blows off, you slap fucking Scott, push him and that, and then blah blah, and you get on the mic and say what you're gonna do. Scott comes back, picks up that bucket and jams on your head. Now when you jam it on your head, don't fucking push it off straight away. Let the people think that it's got a vacuum and it's stuck there. So wobble it around on your head.
Jeez.
Now this is on USA Network.
Oh, they must have loved that.
That was one angle I'll always remember. I hadn't taken the book yet, but that was Tully getting it all off Terry Funk. Terry Funk was a great guy for the finishers.
Yeah, I'm so glad.
All Dory's best finishers came from Terry.
Wow.
Oops, sorry.
I've lost you guys.
Oh, here we go. There we go.
Yeah.
So, we've been going lots, and we're going to go a few more territories. Obviously, there are probably way more territories than we have to cover the time. So since we have Luke and since we have Chief here, we are definitely going to cover a few of the things that they're more familiar with. And if we have to revisit down the road, folks, and do some of the other territories, we will.
Sure.
And we'll find people who are in those territories. But let's move a quick little lateral move down to Puerto Rico. We have a big Puerto Rican thing coming up, but we're going to get Bushwhacker Luke's look at Puerto Rico from his vantage point. So talk a bit, Luke, about going into Puerto Rico.
Tell you, we were in NWA and that working for Crockett, and they put the pacifier belts on us. Not the world belts, the pacifier, the Mid-Atlantic. And that territory, the Mid-Atlantic belts were called the pacifiers.
Yeah.
But you'd work semi-main, and you'd be in the group of 3 or 4 matches in the big events. But in the smaller towns they ran, there'd be a single match and a tag match on top. So, and we were doing 3,500 miles a week in the car. Got the call from Puerto Rico from Frenchie Martin, who had been in New Zealand numerous times when I was working in New Zealand. And then he says, you can make up to 2,000 a week working 3 days a week. We gave our notice. We gave Crockett 6 weeks notice and we didn't know at the time. You didn't give Jim Crockett the notice. He gave you notice. He wasn't used, because it was a territory that everyone wanted to be in. It was the biggest territory in North America at the time, the NWA out of Charlotte. It was hot. So anyhow, we go to Puerto Rico. The first night, Carlos, I sat in the office with Carlos, and this is 1981 or 1980. I sat in the office with him, planned it out. He was going to be in the foyer at 7:30 or 8 o'clock signing photos. He never does it, but now and again it was a free autograph session with Carlos Colon in the lobby going into the arena, and it was in Caguas, indoor, not outdoor, which held about at that time. It held about 6,000 people, 5,000 people. Anyhow, no one knows this and that. So Carlos is signing, and he says, you guys come through the front door, split your flagpole, and beat me up. So we come through the front door. All the people are packed around the table. There's a line of people. No one knew who we were. We had our bags with a guy with us too, who was helping us with our bags. Come in, we split the flagpole and we beat him to pulp. There was blood all over the table, all over the photos, blood squirting on the wall, everything. This is Puerto Rico, mate.
Awesome.
Carlos, you saw Carlos's head, you know what it was like. And that there was blood all over the place. So we left it. That night, we were booked against Carlos and the Invader, the top two baby faces in Puerto Rico and in the Caribbean, right? So come to the match time, the last match of the night, and that Invader comes out, and you know, the referee says, your opponent's not here tonight, but there's numerous guys in the dressing room. You can call on, and he says, no, this is something I have to take care of myself for Carlos and something I have to take care of for Carlos and myself. So we started the match with the Invader, and you know, we put him over at the start. He outshined us. We cut him off. He came out on top. We cut him off. He came out on top, and then we buried him and start getting heat on him. And he would call over. He would put his foot up and stop one of us, and then call over to the corner like it was a tag match. He'd come to his senses and realize and try and fight back, and then we'd both come in like pit bulls on him again. And that, anyhow, we grounded him down in the end. He wore a white mask, and then, of course, he hit the forehead, and there was blood coming through the mask. You know, the mask would get all bloody and go red. And we're beating him up and getting more blood, and all of a sudden an ambulance come into the fucking building, and out of the fucking passenger seat, Carlos Colon come out with a bat. And what's the movie, Walking Tall?
Yeah.
You know, when Buford Prosser comes to town and cleans house. Well, he came in that ring with that thing, started swinging. We caught a couple of shots, and we got out of Dodge. And that, so we still kept the heat. But the people fucking went unglued. They got about 15 minutes, you know. But the aftermath was another aftermath, staying in the arena, you know, and fans cut us off about getting back to the dressing room. So we were stuck between the ring, outside of the ring, and the dressing room. And we had to wait for security to get together. They were worried because when the crowd rioted there, they rioted. Andy will tell you.
Yeah.
They rioted, mate. And
it's safe. Can I just real quick, mate, real quick. It's just safe to say I don't think there's any crowd that compares to a Puerto Rico crowd, especially like back in the 80s.
Wow.
Is that fair to say, Luke? Like, I don't think anybody was as rabid, as wild. Nowhere.
Definitely the most dangerous crowds.
Yes.
You would probably, right,
Luke? These guys had shields, like in the Roman days. You know, they used to throw spears, and they had big shields on their wrist and arm, body shields. Well, these
like
guys had perspex body shields. This is how it was in 1980, 81. You know, wow. They weren't body length. They were about from your knees up above their head. Perspex shield. And it was rounded, strapped on their arm, and they had a baton in their other hand.
Sheesh.
That shows you how it was.
You sure you want to be a bad guy there?
And these Puerto Ricans, God bless them, they were all baseball pitchers. They could pitch from up in the stands over a net, and the thing would land in the ring. Now outside the arenas at the shows, guys would be selling bags of limes. You know what a lime is?
Yeah. Like
a lemon, but it's about that size. A small lemon, about that size, and they were hard as rock, and they would sell them bags of them, big bags of them, because these are what they used to throw at the wrestlers. You know, the people outside the ring. And another thing too, the paper cups. They were getting the paper cups with ice, squeeze them around the top, and use those. You know, and that was like rocks hitting you too.
Well, I can't imagine something great as having a nice big
Now
fat forehead and a
then
line.
they had a period of time they were throwing spark plugs. I guess the guys outside were selling spark plugs because spark plugs the ring would be full of spark plugs. You know what I mean?
Jeez. And I guess batteries too was a famous thing too, right? Was it not? Just whipping batteries at each other.
Yep.
I just remember talking about the violence and that back in your country, back in there, PEI. We did an angle with Don Leo and Emil Dupree there, and everyone was drinking bottles of beer in the arena. Next minute, beer bottles were smashing against the ring post, coming in there. That was wild. All those potato pickers, or the potato pickers they call them. But I remember that. I remember that night because Butch and me, the beer bottles were coming. We're having to put our arm up over our eyes. We were getting hit in the head with beer bottles. They're coming from all directions.
Jeez.
Edward Island.
The Maritimes was still hot, and we were the last time I worked the Maritimes was 2009, and we did a gimmick in the main event, and the people were so hot, the heels were barricaded in the dressing room, and people were just pounding on the door like they were not leaving, and police were called, and the people were still there pounding on the door. And what they had done to get us out of the building was they snuck us out a back door of the dressing room and into the back of the ring truck. So we were laying on the ring like under the tarp to get out of the building, and the people were all still there waiting for us to come out.
That's
and
awesome.
What was like really spectacular about it is that we got about 3 blocks away from the arena. Of course, like we had like dove in the ring truck. We don't even have the back door of the ring truck closed. It's just like, just get out of here so that we don't die. And about 3 blocks down the road, we got pulled over by the police for this unsecured load. And so, one of my travel mates was suddenly very paranoid because maybe he had imbibed on some things that he wasn't supposed to and was worried about. So the police came, they opened up the back, we explained the situation. They were like, carry on. And just another night in the Maritimes.
Now,
yeah, I was up, mate. I spent from 2:10 to 2:13 booking for Chuck Martin up there. Once every month in the winter, I do a week. We do a week once a month from April, May, right through to September, October, till they put the ice down.
Yeah.
oh, wow.
Yeah, he's still running up there. He's out of Halifax.
Okay. Now that story would have been so much awesome if once they were throwing potatoes. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Just a whole thing of potatoes. That would have been awesome.
I'm sure there's enough potatoes in the ring already.
Oh,
back to Puerto Rico. That was
Yes.
our first night in Puerto Rico, mate. And that, trying to get back to the dressing room. That was wild. And anyhow, now funny story then, one of the main stars of Puerto Rico from the what era? From the 2000, the 90s. When I was here in 81 or 80, he was security. Savio Vega, who became, he worked 2 gimmicks. He worked as Savio Vega, and what was the other gimmick?
TNT.
TNT. Yeah, I talked to him. I still talk to him about twice every week. Anyhow, he worked that gimmick there. He was security at the time too. His uncle ran the security company. And then in 83, I came back and he was doing, or 84, I came back and was a booker for Carlos then. And he was he was actually working then, in a mask. He was working in a mask, but not as TNT then, just working a mask. Because I sent him to Blue Waters territory then. And then he went out to Blue Waters territory to work for a while, and then he came back. And of course, TNT was made, and then he was owner of a company. Of course, Andy knows that, but that's getting way down the road. We're in the 80s. We're in the 80s now. How bad it was there. and it was really bad. When I come back in '83, I got sliced many. I was in court, sliced in my arm. I've been sliced a couple of times there. The fans used to put razor blades between their hands and that, like that. See your fat hand, the blade would be there, and they'd slap you and draw and pull it down, and it would slice you.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to know what they do over there now, Luke? The last 10 years I've been working over there. Now their big thing is to piss in cups, and then they throw the cups of piss at you.
Yeah. Yeah, they used to piss. Remember the old Carglass dressing room, and that before they redid the Coliseum up. This was in the '80s. They used to piss through the wall, and that you were downstairs, but there's cracks in that. And a screen. They would piss through the screen, and the piss would come down on the walls in the dressing room. and you'd hear, I fucked your mother. I fucked your mother.
Wow. God bless Puerto Rico.
Yeah, but a lot of stories of Puerto Rico. We used to go in a van, and the guy that drove the van, he had a couple of screwdrivers in the back, grinded right to a sharp point, and he had rocks in the back of the van, too. In the back of the van, we all used to drive. All the hills used to drive. The windows were darkened and that, but we all used to drive to the towns there. And that getting out of the arena some nights, he would be out. He could throw rocks and hit a guy a long way away. The driver, he was safe. He took care of the heels, but we had to pay him to drive the loop every Sunday.
Holy smokes!
Saturday and Sunday, he would take us from the hotel. Saturday we'd do Bayamon, Carglass, or Humacao. We'd do one of the main towns around there. Mainly Bayamon or Carglass or Central San Juan, and that he would drive us to the towns. Because these days on a Saturday night, a normal Saturday night, you draw 8,000 people every Saturday night. This is in the '80s with no big card, just the local guys. With the television, we had angles, and then we went into the ballparks for the big shows. It was in the 20s, up to 25,000. In the ballparks, because the ballparks held about 19 to 20, and they put 4,000 seats out on the grass. Wow. It was crazy. Yeah. 2,000 people on the grass. It was crazy. To get to that fucking, come out of that dugout, you had to run to the ring. The ring would be inside the first base. And you'd have to run for it, and look over your back while you're running, and that to get in the ring, because once you're in the ring, you could see stuff coming over the net, because there's always nets around the front of the stand. But when you come out of the dugout, they could lob stuff over and get you before you got to the ring, and only in the big shows and that when they had the big crowds were the ground seated. And one show we did a crucifix of this was going right back after WWE, but we done a lot of hot angles and this night we done a crucifix on a cage match. We at the end of the cage match we crucified Invader 1 up on the side of the ring, so he was on the apron, but onto the cage. The cage was on the apron, and he was there, and I tied him up there with barbed wire. I had gloves and barbed wire, thin barbed wire, and fitted around his arms, both arms, around his legs, so he's on the side of the cage like a crucifix, and we came back and drew one hell of a house, and that night, getting out of that ring, it was an hour and a half between the end of our match and the next match. That's how they had to wait to get the crowd to quiet down. It was fucking wild that night. Wild. Wow. These matches started late. The fans were coming at 7:30. The show would start to 9. So they'd be drinking hard liquor, and they'd be drinking hard liquor and beer right through the show. So coming to the end of the night, that's why a lot of the main events were before intermission, because by the end of the night, it was, if you didn't work before intermission or after intermission and get out before the crowd got out, you'd be dead meat. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a thing over there known as Puerto Rico time. The guys
Puerto
have been
Rico
over.
time.
Yeah. I remember the very first time I was over there for a show, and the show was supposed to start at 7:30, and I was at the courts where we were having it, and I was trying to find the promoter, and they're like, "Well, he's not here yet," and it was like 7:25. I'm like, and there's no people there yet, and I'm like, "Well, I thought they were advertising this for 7:30, right?" And they're like, "The promoter will be here about 8:00, right?" He shows up at 8. The show starts at 9. The place is packed, but they advertise stuff for 7:30.
Yeah.
That sounds like some companies I know in Canada.
Puerto Rico time.
Hey, mate, intermission, they sold liquor. So the intermission would go on. They'd let the intermission go on and on till people stopped buying it, till there was only one line of people across the bar.
Yeah.
But it'd be packed back, 10 people stacked back, and right across the bar, 10 people, and they would stay serving. I've gone to the ring there 12:30, quarter to 1 many times.
It'd be like a 45-minute, hour-long intermission for a show that would, Chifa's 7:30. I know a lot of our shows were like 8:00, 8:30, bell time, and they wouldn't start till like 9:00, 9:15.
Yeah, it's more like that. I was just using 7:30 just as a
time. and that's one of the things.
Yeah, because a lot of times, when I was working Savio over there, and we were doing the main event, we were going on like 12:30. Yeah. 1:00 in the morning.
Oh, yeah. Well, what time do the cards end? What time do they usually end?
Whenever.
Yeah, whenever. I mean, what was an average, though? I mean, were they going like 1 in the morning? Like
anything from like 12 to 1. Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
12 to 1's
especially the weekend.
Most shows end, yeah.
Yeah, the Friday, Saturday shows in this. That was one of the things, is that you'd have to tell all the guys coming in that weren't like native to Puerto Rico. Said, look, this is Puerto Rico time. This is how it works.
Yep.
Don't get mad. Don't get upset. Just accept it. This is like an island of like 2 to 3 million people to 1. So you're not going to win. Just acknowledge that if the show says 8:30 start time, maybe 9:15 we'll get going.
Don't make any.
Technically, they're on Eastern time, but they're really on Puerto Rican time.
Yeah. Right.
Mate, don't make any arrangements for after the match.
Exactly.
You can never keep it.
Yeah.
Wow. So this is the question I have for 3 guys here for sure have been to Puerto Rican wrestling and been there and been a part of it. If it's this crazy, if there's this much almost possible violence against you, what motivates you to actually want to do this? Is it excitement? Is it an adrenaline rush?
Yeah.
Yeah, you got people that are still that passionate about it, and you don't find that as much in the States anymore. I mean, there's pockets, but people down there are still very passionate about it, and that's what you live for.
And that
the passion, the buy-in, and I don't want to say it's easy for the sake of making it. Oh yeah, like it's easy work, but it is one of those things where when that passion's there, when that believability is there, when that buy-in is there. I mean, like Chief will tell you, Luke will tell you, Vance will tell you. I mean, everybody loves to work in front of even if it's a crowd of like 50 versus a crowd of 500. If the crowd of 500 is going to be silent, but the crowd of 50 is going to rock the place, chances are you're going to want to work in front of the crowd of 50 just because they're going to react, and that that connection's going to be there. And that's how Puerto Rico would be every night. The hot angles, like things are on fire. Like Luke says, it's an hour and a half from when the match is over to the next match gets started. Who in their right mind as a professional wrestler wouldn't want to be a part of that?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
So,
even if there's piss and razor blades and batteries.
You know what? I mean, we cause we're talking territories. We're not, kind of just general like North America. But even, I mean, like to work in Mexico, like for me, for my time there, that was one of the things as a green heel. When we used to fight out into the crowd, to me, it was like, how many beers were I getting thrown on me?
Yeah. Did you work the border towns down there, Andy?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Agua Prieta, Nogales, all of that.
Those Reynosa, Nuevo Laredo, all along there. Yep. And that was
area
it.
in '86 was out in Arizona, and then I got booked in those border towns. I used to work those in the late '80s and early '90s, but those could be dangerous too.
Yeah, and you work in the Plaza del Toros, and it's like some of the little bullfighting arenas and whatnot, and that's just like, like you guys can say, okay, well, I'm doing this for the money or whatever, but when you're getting that reaction, when you're getting that heat as a heel, when you're getting that love as a babyface, that's what it's all about. Mm-hmm. So Puerto Rico, when you talk about Puerto Rico being a hotbed, like I could listen to Luke tell stories all day, and I can just envision it, and I just like would love to be a part of that heat. Like, okay, yeah, your life's in danger at times, sure, but man, like that's when you're working towards getting that reaction, that's gonna be one of the greatest things in the world.
Hey, ambulance matches is unbelievable. The ambulance is ringside, and that the tags here in tags. It's easier in a single match in tags. You've got to knock the two guys down, and then knock them down semi-conscious, put them in the ambulance. Once you're in the ambulance, you've got to drive to the gate. Ambulance drives about 5 miles, 8 miles an hour. We'll be driving across to the park, especially at Baymont, outside to the gate on the other side of the arena. The fans have jumped out of the stands and run across and opened the back of the ambulance and came in on us, and we've had to lean back against the wall and put our boot to them till the invaders or Carlos and the baby faces have come and pushed the fans aside and said, we'll take care of it. And then we've fought back out of the back of the ambulance and fought back to the ring and started all over again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Wow. One other thing I want to mention about Puerto Rico wrestling, and Chief and Luke, I know you guys will back me up on this. I can't think of another territory. I mean, nowadays, when we had, not during the pandemic, but when we had crowds in the matches, and the people would get behind it, you get like the "This is awesome" chant, and you get a Ric Flair, somebody chops somebody, you get the woo. But in Puerto Rico, especially when things were hot, it didn't have to be a comeback. It could be early on when things are hot, and the baby face is getting on the heels, and that crowd, doesn't matter how big, how small it was, the baby face would be giving it to the heel, and you'd get that wah, wah, wah. Nothing like that anywhere. I dare you to tell me anywhere else that was like that for like the past 20, 30, 35 years or whatever. Yeah. Nowhere.
Wow.
Carlos and Jovica opened up in '75, with Gula Monsoon and that. And it's been like that since. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And in Arena Mexico, it's the same. In Arena Mexico?
Yeah.
The big one with the hole in the roof,
Yep.
Yeah, there.
In Mexico City.
Yeah, Mexico City. There is blood too. Everybody bleeds there. It's unreal. When I was there, there was Babyface, Mil Mascaras, Dos Caras, the Villanos, the Villano brothers. There was another two brothers too that came to the WCW. I can't remember their names. And but
is that like with Silver King and
no, but it was the brothers. It was brothers. One of them had their chins out, and they threw them against the corner post, and they gigged their chins. They had an open chin mask.
Wasn't that Silver King? And I'm trying to think of his brother, El Tejano. Wasn't it Tejano and Silver King?
Dr. Wagner Jr. is Silver King's brother.
Okay, no, I got it mixed up then. Okay, I apologize.
Yeah. And the other ones too, their shoulders were all slashed. You throw them against the ring post, and they slashed their shoulders. There's scars up and down their shoulders.
Puerto Rico right there.
Yeah. Hey, Chief, where are you living at the moment?
I live in Iowa.
In Iowa.
Yep. Flyover country.
Weren't you living down not Birmingham, somewhere down south before?
No, I worked down. I was working down there a lot, but I've always lived in Iowa.
Iowa, okay.
Okay. Well, you know what, guys? Obviously, there are so many other territories we haven't even touched, big name territories. We didn't even really talk about Florida or Portland or Georgia or all kinds of places. There's so many more. I think we're probably going to have to, down the road, revisit another territories thing and try and talk about the other ones we missed. But these are some great examples. And I think one of the things that's pretty evident in here is that it was a whole different world of wrestling to what the kind of wrestling is today.
Yeah.
And I don't even mean just in the style, but everything from the way stories were told, the way people reacted, the way things happened was a whole different world. Now, we're going to finish up here, but I just have a few little questions that I wanted to ask Luke since we got him here. Little questions. And if anyone wants to throw in a question,
I'm not going to answer them.
You're going to answer them. You want to answer them. I know you want to talk about this.
I'm not going to answer them.
How about this one question? Back in the day of the sheep herders, there was a guy that used to run around with a flagpole all the time for you, a kind of blonde guy with long hair. Would you say his name was Elio?
Jack Victory.
Jack Victory. Whatever happened to Jack Victory? Because I don't recall anything that's ever happened to him since he was with you guys.
No, after that, he and our other flag bearer, who was Butch's nephew, Butch was his uncle, was Rip Morgan.
Okay.
They teamed up and were in WCW with Lord Littlebrook.
Okay.
They were a tag team. Now, I don't know the name of the tag team. They were something royal, and because Littlebrook was their manager.
Okay. Anyone else know the name?
And this was 1990, around 1990.
Vance?
WCW.
Well, they started them in camo as the New Zealand militia.
Yeah, that's right.
And then they brought them out in the regal robes with Lord Littlebrook as their manager. And I'm blanking on their name now too, but I'm sure I'll think about it.
Right after we click off.
Yeah.
Okay. The next question.
So that's where, and then after that, he went back home up to New Jersey way, Philadelphia, New Jersey way, and he was in the nightclub business.
Okay.
Jack,
All right.
Jack Victory was
Jack
in
Victory.
ECW for years.
Yeah, he was. I think I was. I think I remember that.
In that Steve Carino era of ECW.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now the question I've always wanted, and I might have answered, I think you answered this before in an interview I did with you before, Luke, and I just want the fans on a bigger forum to know this. But I know you loved your whole time as the sheep herders. You've told me that so many times in the stories. Then you go over to the WWE, you become a bushwhacker, and they don't let you really wrestle like you used to. Did you like that transition? Which one did you prefer? I know it was harder probably as a sheep herder.
It's not, mate. It's not, they didn't know. They didn't, they wanted us. They wanted us to be like partly sheep herder, partly moondog. And Butch said to me, hey, the sheep herders have been on TBS from 1980 to 88, off and on. You know what I mean? In the NWA territories. And the Moondogs have been on USA Network for about 6 years. He said, let's create something different. Hence, Vince just gave us the name. We created the whole gimmick.
Okay. Who created the licking each other? Who created the licking the head thing? Who was that?
Butch.
And Luke, I think it's fair. I think you need to tell too.
You know what, folks? Guys, do you have any last questions you want to throw out to anyone about anything?
Yeah, I want to touch on that because I know we've talked about that before, and Luke's always made a point of it. Luke, with all due respect, was the smarter one of the two because if I recall correctly, he usually kind of licked his own hand or his own arm. He says, and Butch was actually the one that actually like licked everybody.
Yeah, when I grabbed their head, I grabbed it like that, and I went like that. So I caught my end of my hand, but Butch would slime them.
All right. Well, you know what, folks?
That would not be. Sorry, I had to say that would not be very COVID friendly in 2020.
You have to wear your mask when you lick.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? This was a great discussion, guys. We got in some really cool stuff. We got to talk some real cool history. Before we take off, I'm going to go around, get everyone to throw out whatever kind of social media or anything that you want to throw out there. Like for sure, I know Vance is working on a book. Talk about any of that kind of stuff. throw out your social media, where you want people to get a hold of you for merchandise, get a hold of you for whatever, or if you don't even want to get a hold of them, we'll just put a blank. But that's up to you. So first of all, we'll start off with Luke. Luke, what kind of stuff do you want people to get a hold of you at?
Okay, folks, this weekend I'm doing a virtual Facebook live with Steamboat with what's the name? Stream. What's it called? Anyhow, Facebook Live, WrestleHost. Go to facebook.com/WrestleHost.
Okay.
WrestleHost.
And that this weekend, and also we're coming out with a book, Blood, Sweat, and Cheers. It's about me and Butch, and how the name came, Blood, Sweat, and Cheers, because our life was full of blood and sweat, and then we went to WWF, and there was a Cheers. So that's how the book. I came up with that name. Well, it's copied, but that's how I got that name, Blood, Sweat, and Cheers. And of course, if you need anything and you're not coming to my virtual thing, always go to Bushwhacker, bushwhacker.com, my website, and you get T-shirts and memorabilia there. Also, my Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram is Bushwhacker Luke.
Perfect. All right, Vance, what do you got going on?
You know what? COVID's going on, so you can catch me nowhere. I'm sitting at home, probably in this chair. Been taking advantage of the COVID time. Very, very early days on the research for a new history book that's going to cover the whole of Canada and all of the territories we talked about today and more. So it's been a lot of poring over digital copies of newspapers from the 50s, 60s, and 70s over the last few weeks. I'm very excited to see that project take shape. And beyond that, waiting for British Columbia to relieve some health restrictions and let us get back to action. So,
excellent. Do you have social media you want to throw out for anything?
Anybody can find me on Facebook at Vance Nevada.
Perfect. All right, Chief Attakullakulla.
I actually am returning to the ring this Saturday night for the first time since mid-March.
Good for you.
Up in West Bend, Wisconsin. So for a benefit show we're doing, and we did one a couple of years ago for a little boy. I think he was 3 at the time, had a heart condition, and he recently passed away. So we're doing a benefit show for his family. That'll be my first time back since Mid-March. Okay. And you can get me at the usual places, Rod Attakullakulla or Chief Attakullakulla on Facebook, 2 different pages, Chief_Attakullakulla on Instagram, and then Chief Attakullakulla on Twitter.
Excellent. Andy Anderson.
All right. Well, I want to shovel back over just because there's so little for me to do here. Vance, I'm just curious, what's kind of the year, like how are you going back? You said like the 50s. Are you going from the 50s to like 2000? What's kind of the span of your book coming up?
Well, the last one was about 1910 to 99, but it was just Western Canada. And
right.
This one now is, the challenge is just like the depth of stuff in Quebec, where you get, up to 6 shows a night happening in Quebec, and you're logging every single one. So the stats are going to be indisputed when they're actually compiled.
Yeah.
Actually, today, just before the podcast, I just completed a career record for Gino Brito.
Wow.
It's going to be going out in the mail tomorrow.
Very cool.
A full directory of international wrestling from 80 to 87. And similar, more small projects like that as we work on the bigger project.
Just because he hasn't said it, I'm going to say it. For anybody that is a Canadian wrestling fan, if you're a Canadian wrestling history fan, if there's anything you want to know, bombard this man with your questions. Yes, Vance Nevada, without a doubt, the foremost authoritative individual for Canadian wrestling history. And he's also the man that broke me into the business. So if you have any issue with me being in the business, then that's who you can blame. Exactly.
I'll be talking to you after, Vance. I'll be talking to you after.
and with Bushwhacker Luke, because he was listing off so many things there. Luke, you also do, you're also on Cameo, correct?
Yeah, I'm Cameo.
All right. So if you want a personalized message or anything like that from Bushwhacker Luke, make sure you can check him out on Cameo. For me, I am but a humble social media person. Personally, you can find me on Twitter, the Twitter machine at Andy Anderson PWA, and on Instagram. And I always gotta make sure I don't mess this up. I'm that guy, TCB247. That's the letters IMTHATGUY TCB247. I do a lot of workout stuff on there, and I also kind of relive and try to remember the glory days of my humble wrestling career.
Excellent.
Hey, Andy, can I ask you a question real quick?
Yes, sir.
Is Vance a better friend than Hulk Hogan?
Who isn't? Who isn't? That is mean.
Now, Vance is. You got to watch because Luke is also pretty good friends with Hulk Hogan. So you got to watch what you're saying there. You know what I mean, brother?
All right. Chief. All right.
So, guys, take your vitamins and say your prayers.
But, folks, we also have a ton of stuff coming out in the next couple of months. So much you might get sick of us, but you know what? We guarantee you'll have some fun doing it. So we want to thank you all for joining in. You guys were a lot of fun, a lot of great stories. I want to thank all four of you. You guys gave so much great fun, so much great information, and fans, you got to hear a really great show. And I just want to say thank you and tune in next week. We have yet another show, a new slate of guests, and we'll have a new topic, and we'll be talking about all kinds of things. So, Elio, as I ask you every day, say goodbye to the good people.
Fans, we will talk to you all next week.